Lieutenant Marcus Chen was absolutely certain he was going to vomit from nerves. He'd spent 3 years training for this, his first major diplomatic assignment, junior attaché to the human delegation at the First Contact Summit on Celestia Prime. 3 years learning protocols, studying alien cultures, practicing careful diplomatic language that communicated everything while committing to nothing. 3 years preparing for the moment when humanity would meet with dozens of alien species to discuss trade, territory, peaceful coexistence, and all the complicated political maneuvering that interstellar relations required. And now he was here, standing in the reception hall wearing his formal diplomatic uniform, trying not to hyperventilate while important beings from across the galaxy arrived with appropriate ceremony and gravitas. His job was simple: stand quietly, take notes, observe without interfering, and absolutely, under no circumstances, screw anything up that could damage fragile human-alien relations that were still being established. "You'll be fine," his supervisor, Ambassador Torres, assured him during their final briefing. "Just remember your training. Be respectful, be observant, engage brain before opening mouth, and when in doubt, say nothing at all. Silence is always safer than speech in diplomatic contexts." Marcus was absolutely planning to follow that advice. Silence. Lots of silence. He would be the most professionally silent junior diplomatic officer in the history of interstellar relations. The Valorian delegation arrived mid-afternoon with the kind of ceremony that suggested they were very important, and everyone should be appropriately impressed. Marcus had studied Valorian culture extensively. They were powerful species, technologically advanced, politically influential within their region of space, with strict codes of honor and extremely formal diplomatic protocols. Offending Valorians was considered bad idea by everyone who'd ever tried it and survived to regret the attempt. Princess Kelara led the delegation. Marcus recognized her from briefing materials. Royal heir to the Valorian celestial court, accomplished diplomat despite her relatively young age by Valorian standards, known for intelligence and carefully controlled emotional presentation that made her difficult to read even for beings familiar with Valorian body language. She was stunning. Marcus tried very hard not to think about how stunning she was, because that was inappropriate and objectifying, and exactly the kind of thought that got young diplomats in trouble. Focus on professional observations, he told himself. Note the delegation's composition, their formal attire, the honor guards accompanying the princess. Don't notice that she's tall and elegant with those distinctive crystalline patterns decorating her skin that shift through subtle colors based on emotional state. Don't notice those long, expressive ears that Valorians had instead of human-style external ears, which could angle and position to convey complex emotional information that their carefully controlled faces never revealed. And absolutely, definitely, under no circumstances notice that Valorians apparently shared certain mammalian characteristics with humans, and that Princess Kelara was extremely well endowed by any species standards of proportional anatomy. Her formal diplomatic robes were designed to be modest and appropriate, but they couldn't hide certain facts of biology, and Marcus's brain, which was supposed to be focused on diplomatic observation, kept unhelpfully noticing, and then immediately trying not to notice because noticing was inappropriate and "Stop staring," Ambassador Torres hissed quietly. "And stop looking like you're trying not to stare. You're being obvious." Marcus snapped his attention back to proper diplomatic observation mode, his face burning with embarrassment. Great start. Objectify the alien princess before even being introduced. That's definitely the mark of skilled diplomatic professional. The reception began with formal welcomes, carefully scripted speeches from various delegation heads, and the kind of ritualistic pleasantries that diplomacy required before getting to actual substantive discussions. Marcus stood against the wall taking notes, being professionally invisible, doing his job of observing without interfering. He was managing perfectly fine until Ambassador Torres gestured him forward. "Lieutenant Chen, come here. The princess has expressed interest in meeting some of our junior diplomatic staff. Good opportunity for cultural exchange and building personal connections that facilitate later professional relationships." Marcus approached with all the confidence of a man walking toward his own execution. He'd practiced Valorian greeting customs extensively. The precise angle of bow, the formal phrases in their language, the appropriate physical positioning that conveyed respect without implying submission. He could do this. He was trained for this. He would be professional and respectful and absolutely not say anything stupid. "Your Highness," Ambassador Torres said with appropriate formality, "may I present Lieutenant Marcus Chen, one of our promising young diplomatic officers." "Lieutenant Chen, this is Princess Kalara of the Valorian Celestial Court." Marcus bowed at exactly the right angle, held it for precisely the correct duration, straightened with appropriate measured pace. Perfect execution of Valorian greeting protocol. Points for him. Now came the verbal part. Standard diplomatic introduction, something appropriately complimentary but not excessive, acknowledging her status while establishing his own legitimacy as diplomatic representative. Something about her delegation's impressive arrival, or her reputation for diplomatic skill, or her people's technological achievements, or, "Your Highness, it's an honor to meet you. Your breasts are so big." The words left his mouth before his brain could stop them. The reception hall didn't go completely silent. There were too many delegates in too large a space for that. But their immediate vicinity achieved sudden, horrified quiet as everyone within earshot processed what the human diplomat had just said to Valorian royalty. Ambassador Torres looked like he'd been physically struck. The Valorian honor guards reached for weapons with the kind of smooth efficiency that suggested they practiced defending their princess's honor regularly. Several nearby delegates from various species stopped their conversations to stare at Marcus with expressions ranging from shocked to fascinated to deeply amused, depending on their cultural contexts for understanding what had just happened. And Princess Kalara, her crystalline patterns flashed through a rapid sequence of colors that Marcus's panicked brain was frantically trying to interpret. Shock, definitely shock. Then confusion. Then something his translator's cultural database was rendering as intense interest mixed with amusement, which couldn't possibly be right because he just made spectacularly offensive comment about her anatomy, and she should be angry or offended or demanding his immediate execution. Not interested and amused. Her long ears angled forward in expression that Marcus's training identified as either aggressive focus or intense curiosity. And his training materials had been very clear that those two interpretations led to very different outcomes, and distinguishing between them required context clues that Marcus couldn't process right now because his brain was busy screaming in horror at what his mouth had just done. I'm so sorry," Marcus stammered, his face burning with mortification so intense he wondered if spontaneous combustion was possible. "That's not what I meant to say. I was trying to compliment your delegation's impressive presence. I meant to say your delegation is so big, as in large and impressive. But my brain, I mixed up the words. I said something completely inappropriate and offensive, and I'm so sorry, Your Highness. Please don't let my complete idiocy damage human-Valorian relations. I'm just an incompetent fool who apparently can't speak basic standard without catastrophically screwing up the most important introduction of my career. You think my breasts are big." Princess Kalara interrupted his desperate babbling, and were those harmonic overtones in her voice suggesting she was trying not to laugh. That couldn't be right. She should be furious. She should be demanding his head. Why did she sound amused? "Yes, no, Marcus wanted to die. Wanted the elegant floor of the reception hall to crack open and swallow him into whatever underworld Celestia Prime might have. "I wasn't supposed to be looking at your breasts. That's completely inappropriate diplomatic behavior. I was supposed to be observing your delegation professionally, not noticing personal anatomical features that are none of my business. I'm so incredibly sorry. But you did look, she said, and her crystalline patterns were definitely shifting toward colors that meant amusement according to his translator database. And you did form an opinion. And then you shared that opinion with me directly, if entirely accidentally. That's refreshingly honest. Most diplomats spend hours saying elaborate nothing while pretending not to notice anything personal about the beings they're negotiating with. You managed to be startlingly personal in literally your first sentence. I'm going to be fired, Marcus said miserably, possibly executed, definitely sent home in disgrace. I'm so sorry, Your Highness. This is the worst first impression in the entire history of diplomatic relations between any species anywhere. Actually, Princess Kelara said, her long ears angling an expression that Marcus's database was now definitely identifying as amused curiosity rather than aggressive focus. It's the most memorable first impression I've received in years. Possibly ever. Tell me, Lieutenant Chen, do all humans form such strong opinions about Valorian anatomy within seconds of meeting us, or is this personal observation unique to you? Marcus was absolutely certain he was about to be arrested, or executed, or at minimum forcibly removed from the reception and sent back to Earth in disgrace that would follow him for the rest of his very short diplomatic career that had just ended approximately 90 seconds after his first major diplomatic introduction. Ambassador Torres had the expression of someone watching their carefully groomed protege commit professional suicide in spectacular fashion. The Valorian honor guards had their hands on their weapons, waiting for Princess Kelara's signal to either stand down or remove the offensive human from her presence permanently. Every nearby delegate was watching with varying degrees of shock, fascination, or, in some cases that suggested certain species had compatible senses of humor with humans, barely suppressed amusement at the unfolding disaster. But Princess Kelara was laughing. Not openly. Valorian royalty apparently didn't laugh openly in formal diplomatic settings, but her crystalline patterns were cycling through colors that Marcus's translator database firmly identified as genuine amusement, and her ears were angled forward with expression that definitely conveyed delighted curiosity rather than offended anger. Marcus struggled to form coherent words. I genuinely don't know how to answer that question without making this situation significantly worse than it already is, Your Highness. Answering honestly seems to have got me into this spectacular mess, but lying seems even worse. Then answer honestly, Princess Kelara said, gesturing to her guards to stand down with the kind of casual authority that suggested she was not, in fact, threatened or offended, just interested. You've already destroyed any possibility of proper diplomatic protocol existing between us, Lieutenant Chen. Might as well continue with the refreshing directness. Do humans generally find Valorian anatomy noteworthy, or is this observation personal to you? Marcus glanced desperately at Ambassador Torres, silently pleading for rescue. Torres just looked pained and gestured slightly as if to say, "You made this disaster, you handle it." No help from that quarter. He was completely on his own with the alien princess, who was asking him to continue discussing her physical attributes in the middle of a diplomatic reception that was apparently turning into theater for everyone within viewing distance. Humans notice differences, Marcus said carefully, his brain finally engaging enough to attempt damage control even if it was far too late for actual control. Between our species and others, Valorians share certain physical characteristics with humans. Bilateral symmetry, similar proportional features, certain anatomical commonalities that suggest some parallel evolutionary development despite our species arising on different worlds. So yes, humans notice when those common features are particularly prominent in specific individuals, but we're extensively trained not to comment on them, especially not in diplomatic contexts. And I am so incredibly, profoundly sorry that my brain-to-mouth filter apparently completely failed and resulted in me making wildly inappropriate observation about your anatomy when I was supposed to be saying something respectful about your delegation's impressive size and ceremonial arrival. So you did mean it, Princess Kelara said, and was she actually pleased? Her patterns were shifting toward colors that looked distinctly warm, distinctly positive. You genuinely observed that my breasts are large by human standards, and your first instinctive response was to share that observation despite all your training screaming at you not to. That's fascinatingly honest. Most species spend diplomatic encounters carefully filtering every single word to avoid giving any possible offense. You managed to give spectacular offense, or what should have been spectacular offense, within literally seconds of being introduced. And yet, she studied him with those eyes that had subtle crystalline patterns even in the irises, analyzing him with intensity that made Marcus feel like a specimen under examination. You're not leering. You're not making suggestive comments or inappropriate propositions. You're absolutely mortified. You apologized immediately and extensively. You're not trying to justify what you said or dismiss it as harmless. You're just, honestly, genuinely embarrassed about an honest, genuine mistake where your brain's language processing failed under pressure. That's oddly charming. I'm charming. Marcus's brain was struggling to process this interaction, which had gone in directions that exactly 0 hours of diplomatic training had prepared him for. You're not angry. You're not going to demand I be sent home. You're not going to file formal complaint through diplomatic channels that results in me being fired and possibly barred from ever working in interstellar relations again. Oh, I should be angry, Princess Kelara agreed, her ears tilting with continued amusement. Valorian honor codes and cultural standards absolutely suggest I should be deeply offended by your inappropriate comments about my body. I should demand formal apology through proper diplomatic channels, possibly request compensation for insult to royal dignity. Definitely make it clear that such behavior is completely unacceptable. That would be the proper, expected response according to my culture's diplomatic protocols. Her patterns shifted through several colors in quick succession, but you were so obviously, painfully not trying to insult me. You were clearly attempting some kind of compliment, completely wrong compliment, spectacularly inappropriate compliment, but compliment nonetheless. And your immediate horror at your own words was absolutely genuine. You're not some skilled diplomatic operative trying to destabilize relations through calculated offense disguised as accident. You're just nervous junior officer whose mouth operated independently of his brain for one unfortunate moment. I find that refreshingly human, actually. Very endearing in ways that proper, calculated diplomatic behavior never manages to be. Your Highness, Ambassador Torres interjected, finally finding his voice. I want to assure you that Lieutenant Chen will face appropriate disciplinary action for this serious breach of protocol. His behavior was completely unacceptable and absolutely does not represent human diplomatic standards or the behavior we expect from our representatives. Oh, please don't discipline him, Princess Kelara interrupted, her patterns flashing with something that looked almost protective. He's already suffered quite enough mortification, which I suspect is worse punishment than any official reprimand. Adding formal disciplinary action would be excessive for what was clearly unintentional error. Besides, I'm choosing not to be offended. That's absolutely my right as the theoretically offended party. If I decide his comment was awkward compliment rather than deliberate insult, then that's what it was, and there's no diplomatic incident to address. She turned back to Marcus, and her expression softened in ways that made her seem less like distant royalty and more like actual person. Lieutenant Chen, I formally accept that you made verbal error under pressure of first significant diplomatic introduction, and that you meant absolutely no disrespect or offense. Your extensive apology is accepted. Now shall we start this introduction again, properly this time, with fewer comments about anyone's anatomy unless such comments are actually relevant to diplomatic discussions. Yes, please. I would absolutely love to start over and pretend the last 5 minutes didn't happen. Marcus managed, relief flooding through him with almost physical force. Though I strongly suspect everyone who witnessed this is going to remember it forever and tell stories about the idiot human who complimented alien royalty's breasts within seconds of meeting her. Oh, absolutely, Princess Kelara agreed cheerfully. This will definitely be story told in diplomatic circles for years, possibly decades. Remember that first contact summit when the human lieutenant told Princess Kelara her breasts were big in front of 50 witnesses and somehow didn't get executed? You're going to be famous, Lieutenant Chen, or infamous perhaps, but definitely memorable. That's exactly what I always wanted to be known for, Marcus said weakly. My spectacular diplomatic failures. Better to be known for spectacular failures than not known at all, Kelara said with what sounded like genuine wisdom. And who knows? Perhaps this spectacular failure will lead to something unexpectedly positive. Stranger things have happened in diplomatic history. She offered him what seemed to be Valorian equivalent of reassuring smile. Come, walk with me. Tell me about Earth and human diplomatic aspirations. And try not to comment on any more of my anatomical features, unless you have sudden compelling diplomatic reason to do so. Marcus followed her, still somewhat dazed, while Ambassador Torres watched with expression suggesting he couldn't decide whether to be relieved or concerned that the princess was apparently finding this entire situation amusing rather than offensive. Over the next hour, Marcus discovered that Princess Kelara seemed genuinely entertained by the whole disaster, rather than merely being diplomatically polite about accepting his apology. She kept him close during the reception, supposedly because she was interested in human perspectives on the summit, but Marcus suspected she was actually enjoying watching him squirm every time another delegate looked their way, and clearly remembered his spectacular opening comment. You're having too much fun with this, Marcus finally said during a relatively quiet moment when they were standing by the refreshment tables. You're enjoying my mortification. Perhaps a little, Kelara admitted, her patterns shifting through amused colors. But I'm also genuinely enjoying your company. Most diplomats are so careful, so filtered, so concerned with saying exactly the right thing in exactly the right way that they never actually say anything meaningful. You said something spectacularly wrong, yes, but it was genuine, real, unfiltered. I find that refreshing after years of carefully scripted diplomatic interactions where everyone performs their assigned roles without ever revealing actual thoughts or feelings. So I'm your entertainment? Marcus asked. The awkward human who can't control his mouth. You're the honest human who makes mistakes but owns them, she corrected. That's actually quite admirable quality, Lieutenant Chen. The first contact summit continued over the following days, and Marcus remained absolutely convinced that his career was over despite Princess Kelara's unexpected mercy and apparent amusement at his spectacular introduction failure. Ambassador Torres had given him no fewer than 6 separate lectures about proper diplomatic behavior, appropriate comments, the critical importance of engaging brain before opening mouth, and the many ways Marcus had violated basically every principle of successful interstellar diplomacy. His colleagues, the other junior diplomatic staff, avoided him like his stupidity might be contagious. Other delegates from various species gave him looks ranging from horrified, "Can you believe what that human said?" to distinctly amused, "Did you hear what that human said?" Brilliant. Depending on their species' cultural context for understanding what had happened and whether they found it offensive or hilarious. But Princess Kelara kept requesting his presence at various summit functions. Lieutenant Chen should attend this trade discussion session, she would tell the scheduling coordinator. His unique perspective on interspecies communication would be valuable. Lieutenant Chen's observations during the technology exchange would be appreciated. She would inform Ambassador Tours, who couldn't exactly refuse direct request from visiting royalty, even if he clearly thought keeping Marcus away from the princess was better strategy. Marcus was absolutely certain she was messing with him, torturing him, even keeping him around because she found watching him be uncomfortable entertaining. But he couldn't refuse direct requests from alien royalty without causing the kind of diplomatic incident that would definitely end his career. So he kept ending up in situations where he had to be perfectly professional and diplomatic, while everyone in attendance clearly remembered his spectacular failure at being perfectly professional and diplomatic. "You're definitely torturing me," Marcus finally accused during one of the rare moments when they were relatively alone, standing on an observation deck overlooking Celestia Prime's impressive capital city, while other delegates were attending sessions that didn't require junior staff presence. "You keep specifically requesting my attendance at various functions because interaction, yes, but it was genuine. It was real. It was honest, even if accidentally so. I find that refreshing after literal years of diplomatic interactions where everyone carefully performs their assigned roles without ever being actual people. So I'm interesting because I'm incompetent." "You're interesting because you're human," she corrected. "And I don't mean that in species-specific way, though you are literally human. I mean you're authentically yourself in ways that most beings involved in diplomatic work have trained themselves out of. You make mistakes, but you own them immediately. You don't try to justify or minimize or pretend they didn't happen. You just apologize genuinely and try to do better. That's admirable quality, Marcus. That's character worth knowing better." "You called me Marcus," he observed, "not Lieutenant Chen. We're alone. Formality seems excessive given that you've already commented on my breasts," she said, and there was definite mischief in her tone. "May I call you Marcus, or do you prefer maintaining professional distance through titles?" "You can call me Marcus," he said, giving up on maintaining any pretense of proper diplomatic distance. "Seems pointless to insist on formality after I've already spectacularly destroyed any possibility of appropriate professional relationship between us." "Excellent. And you may call me Kalara when we're not in formal diplomatic contexts. I tire of being Your Highness and Princess constantly. It's exhausting being royal title rather than actual person." She turned to face him more fully. "Tell me honestly, Marcus, and I'm asking for genuine honesty now, not diplomatic filtering. Do you actually believe what happened at our introduction was career-ending disaster? Or are you perhaps being overly dramatic about what was ultimately just awkward mistake?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "Honestly, I think it should have been career-ending disaster. I made spectacularly inappropriate comment to alien royalty in front of dozens of witnesses. That's exactly the kind of mistake that gets junior diplomats sent home in disgrace. The only reason I'm not currently on transport back to Earth is because you chose to be amused rather than offended, which frankly still baffles me." "Why does it baffle you?" "Because I objectified you. I reduced you to physical characteristic within seconds of meeting you. That's offensive regardless of species or cultural context." "You noticed physical characteristic," Kalara corrected. "And you accidentally shared that observation when you meant to comment on something else entirely. That's not the same as deliberately reducing me to physical attributes or treating me as object rather than person. Context matters, Marcus. Intent matters. You've spent every interaction since that moment treating me as intelligent being worth conversing with, not as collection of appealing physical features. That suggests your initial comment was genuine mistake, not reflection of how you actually view me." "You're very kind," Marcus said, "or very strange, I haven't decided which. Perhaps both." Her patterns shifted to warmer colors. "May I tell you something? Something that might help you understand why I'm not offended? Please, because I genuinely don't understand how you're not furious with me. Because in Valorian culture, Directness is valued, Kelara explained. We have elaborate formal protocols for diplomatic interactions, yes, but those exist specifically because direct honesty can be problematic in political contexts. When we're not performing diplomacy, when we're just being people, Valorians actually appreciate straightforward honesty. You were extremely direct, accidentally, but direct nonetheless. And your immediate horror showed that you understood the comment was inappropriate, that you had enough social awareness to recognize you'd made mistake. That combination of directness and social awareness suggests you're worth knowing better. So my spectacular failure was actually culturally appropriate. Your spectacular failure was culturally fascinating, she corrected, and it made you memorable in ways that perfect diplomatic performance never would have. I've met hundreds of diplomats over the years. Most of them blur together into indistinguishable mass of careful words and performed courtesy. You're distinct, individual, real. I remember you, Marcus Chen. That's valuable. They talked for hours on that observation deck, and Marcus slowly began to believe that maybe Kelara wasn't just entertaining herself at his expense. She asked genuine questions about Earth and human culture, shared information about Valoria and her experiences as royal heir trying to navigate political responsibilities she'd been born into rather than choosing. Discuss the challenges of diplomatic work when you're young and relatively inexperienced, but expected to represent entire civilizations. Being princess sounds exhausting, Marcus observed after she described some of the formal protocols and expectations that governed her daily life. It is, Kelara agreed. Everything is performance. Every interaction is evaluated for political implications. Every word is analyzed for hidden meanings. I can't simply be person. I'm always symbol, always representative, always performing role. These 2 weeks at the summit are the most freedom I've had in years, and even here I'm constantly aware of being watched and evaluated. Is that why you keep requesting my presence? Marcus asked. Because I already destroyed any possibility of perfect diplomatic performance between us, so you don't have to maintain the same level of careful filtering around me. Partially, she admitted, but also because I genuinely enjoy your company. You're interesting, Marcus. You're kind. You're trying so hard to be good diplomat despite being convinced you've already failed catastrophically. That's endearing. That's worth spending time with. Marcus's heart did something complicated. Kelara, are you saying you actually want to spend time with me? Not just as diplomatic obligation or entertainment, but because you actually enjoy my company. Yes, she said simply. Is that really so surprising? You're a princess. I'm nobody. You're royalty from advanced civilization. I'm junior diplomatic officer who can't even make proper first impression without accidentally insulting you. Why would you want to spend time with me? Because you see me as person, Kelara said. Not as princess, not as political symbol, not as diplomatic challenge. When you look at me, even with that first spectacularly inappropriate comment, you saw actual being. That's rare, Marcus. That's valuable. That's worth pursuing. They stood together on the observation deck as Celestia Prime's sun set, and Marcus began to wonder if his worst mistake might somehow be turning into his best opportunity. The first contact summit concluded after 2 weeks of intensive negotiations, cultural exchanges, preliminary trade agreements, and endless diplomatic maneuvering that Marcus had observed from his junior position, while trying not to make any more spectacular mistakes. He'd survived, largely because Princess Kelara's obvious amusement, rather than anger, had signaled to other delegates that his infamous introduction was awkward error rather than calculated insult. Ambassador Torres had stopped giving him disappointed looks that suggested Marcus had personally set back human-alien relations by decades. His colleagues had progressed from avoiding him to actually joking about the incident, which Marcus decided to interpret as positive development. He was beginning to think that maybe, possibly, his career wasn't completely destroyed after all. The final day brought farewell reception where delegates would exchange parting courtesies before returning to their respective worlds and responsibilities. Marcus was attending because all diplomatic staff were required to, not because he particularly wanted to face more potential awkwardness. He positioned himself against the wall in what he'd come to think of as his natural diplomatic habitat, being professionally invisible while more important people conducted actual diplomacy. Hiding again. Kelara's voice came from beside him, and Marcus hadn't even noticed her approach. Her crystalline patterns were cycling through amused colors that he'd learned to recognize over 2 weeks of regular interaction. Attempting strategic invisibility, Marcus admitted. I've decided my best diplomatic strategy going forward is saying nothing to anyone unless absolutely required. Minimize opportunities for further spectacular mistakes. Boring strategy. Also ineffective. Silence gets misinterpreted just as easily as speech, sometimes more so. She handed him a drink she'd acquired from somewhere, some kind of local beverage that supposedly promoted friendly interaction among different species. Come with me, walk with me. I want to show you something before I leave tomorrow. She led him to the same observation deck where they'd spent several long conversations over the past 2 weeks. Celestia Prime's capital spread below them in growing darkness, lights beginning to appear as the sun completed its setting. The view was spectacular, and Marcus had to admit he was going to miss this. Miss the summit despite its stresses, miss the diplomatic work despite feeling constantly out of his depth, miss Kelara's company despite how their acquaintance had started. I'm returning to Valoria tomorrow morning, Kelara said quietly, looking out over the illuminated city. Back to court, back to royal responsibilities and political obligations, back to my regular life where everyone is always formal and proper and carefully filtered, and nobody ever accidentally tells me what they're actually thinking about anything. I'm sorry, Marcus offered, not entirely sure what response was appropriate. Don't be sorry. It's my life. I chose it, or rather it was chosen for me by circumstances of royal birth, but I've accepted it. This is what being princess means. But I wanted to thank you before I leave. Thank me. For what? Nearly causing diplomatic incident. For being genuinely yourself despite every possible incentive to hide behind diplomatic protocols and careful filtering. For making me laugh when I'd honestly forgot I could laugh at formal functions. For reminding me that perfection is vastly overrated, and that mistakes can actually lead to connections that perfect behavior never would have created. Her patterns shifted through warm, sincere colors. These 2 weeks talking with you have been the most genuinely real interactions I've had with anyone in years. Everyone at court is so careful, so filtered, so concerned with telling me exactly what they think I want to hear or what serves their political goals. You accidentally told me you thought my breasts were big, and then spent 5 minutes apologizing profusely. That's refreshingly honest. Everything after that first disaster, every conversation, every interaction we've had, has been equally honest because you'd already destroyed any possibility of perfect diplomatic pretense existing between us. I'm genuinely grateful for that, Marcus. So my spectacular failure actually helped? Marcus asked, still somewhat amazed by this interpretation. Your spectacular honesty helped, she corrected firmly. The failure was just the delivery mechanism that made the honesty impossible to ignore. She turned to face him fully, her expression serious despite the warm colors still flowing through her crystalline patterns. Marcus, I'm going to say something now that's going to make you very uncomfortable, but I'm going to say it anyway because you've spent 2 weeks teaching me that honesty is valuable even when it's awkward or risky. I've developed feelings for you. Real feelings, romantic feelings, that go far beyond simple amusement at your initial mistake or appreciation for your honesty in subsequent interactions. You're interesting and kind and genuine, and I find myself really not wanting to say goodbye tomorrow when saying goodbye is what diplomatic protocol requires. Marcus's brain completely short-circuited. You. What? I'm sorry, I think I misheard. You didn't mishear. I have feelings for you. Romantic feelings, to be completely and explicitly clear, since we've established that directness is our communication style. Her patterns shifted through colors that Marcus's database identified as vulnerability mixed with hope. I know this is complicated in approximately 17 different ways. You're human. I'm Valorian. You're junior diplomatic officer. I'm royal heir to entire interstellar civilization. Cross-species relationships are complex enough, and cross-status relationships add additional layers of complication. But I wanted you to know before I leave tomorrow. Wanted you to know that what started as your embarrassing mistake became something genuinely meaningful to me. And if you feel anything remotely similar, I'd like to explore that possibility despite all the very logical reasons we probably shouldn't. Marcus struggled to form coherent response while his brain tried to process what she just said. Clara, I don't even know what to say. You're incredible. These 2 weeks talking with you have been the best part of this entire summit. But you're a princess. I'm nobody. You're royalty with political responsibilities and entire civilization, depending on you making appropriate choices. I'm junior diplomat whose career nearly ended before it started because I can't control my mouth under pressure. How would this even work? I genuinely don't know, Clara admitted, and her honesty somehow made this more real rather than less. But I'd like to try finding out. Unless you don't feel similarly, in which case please tell me honestly so I can be appropriately embarrassed about making my own spectacular confession. I do feel the same way, Marcus said, because after 2 weeks of her insisting on honest communication, lying now seemed impossible and wrong. I've been trying very hard not to feel that way because it seemed impossible and inappropriate, and like the worst idea possible given our respective positions. But yes, I have feelings for you too. Strong feelings that go way beyond appreciating that you forgave my terrible first impression and didn't have me executed. Then we try, Clara said with the kind of decisive firmness that suggested she'd made up her mind and wasn't interested in arguments about why they shouldn't. Carefully, because we both have responsibilities and positions that require consideration. Long-distance communication while we figure out logistics. Visits when our schedules and diplomatic requirements permit. Actual relationship building rather than just brief diplomatic acquaintance that ends when the summit does. Does that sound acceptable to you? It sounds impossible and wonderful and absolutely terrifying in equal measure, Marcus said honestly. So yes, let's try it. Let's figure out how to make this work despite all the very good reasons it probably won't. She kissed him then, not exactly human-style kiss, because Valorian physiology was similar but not identical, involving certain harmonic vocalizations, and the way her crystalline patterns glowed with joy during the contact. Marcus kissed back as well as he could while learning Valorian physical affection customs in real time. And together, they figured out how cross-species intimacy could work with patience and communication and genuine desire to make it good for both of them. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Clara was smiling with expression of pure joy that made her seem less like distant royalty and more like actual young woman who just kissed someone she had feelings for. So, she said, her patterns glowing with obvious mischief, in the interest of continuing the honest communication that defines our entire relationship, do you actually think my breasts are particularly large by human standards, or were you just extremely nervous and your brain malfunctioned? Marcus groaned out loud. Are you ever going to let me live that down? Never, she said cheerfully. It's our origin story, the foundation of our entire relationship. When people ask how we met, I'm going to tell them you complimented my breasts within 30 seconds of being introduced, and somehow that worked out perfectly. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened, she countered. You just didn't mean for it to be compliment, but I chose to interpret it as one, and that interpretation led to everything that followed. She took his hand, intertwining their fingers in gesture that worked surprisingly well despite slight anatomical differences. Thank you, Marcus Chen, for being spectacularly, awkwardly, perfectly yourself in that moment. For being so nervous, you said something completely inappropriate that turned out to be completely perfect for breaking through all diplomatic pretense and letting us see each other as actual people rather than just diplomatic representatives. Best terrible first impression I've ever received. Years later, they would still tell the story, at diplomatic functions where they appeared together, at family gatherings once they'd navigated the complex political and cultural requirements of formalizing their relationship, to friends who asked how a human junior diplomat and Valorian princess had managed to build partnership that transcended species and status and all reasonable expectations. How did you two meet? People would ask with genuine curiosity. He told me my breasts were big within 30 seconds of being introduced, Kelara would say with obvious delight. And I decided that was charming rather than offensive, and everything followed from that decision. That's not the whole story, Marcus would protest. I was trying to compliment your delegation, not your anatomy. My brain malfunctioned under pressure. Your brain spoke honestly before your diplomatic training could filter it, she'd correct. And that honesty became foundation for relationship built on genuine communication rather than diplomatic performance. Best malfunction that ever happened to either of us. Do you regret it? People would sometimes ask Marcus privately, saying that to alien princess in front of witnesses, starting your relationship with spectacular mistake. Every single day, Marcus would answer honestly, and not at all, because yes, it was mortifying and should have ended my career and definitely wasn't my finest moment, but it led to her, led to this, led to relationship built on honest communication, because we destroyed any possibility of perfect diplomatic pretense on day one. Can't hide behind professional protocols when you've already made the worst mistake possible and been forgiven for it. That's actually liberating. That's actually the best foundation for genuine partnership. And when friends would tease him about it, asking if he still thought she had impressive proportions, Marcus